The idea that digestion has anything to do with health, with systemic wellness, is virtually foreign to the mainstream of medicine. I think those of us who are familiar with Ayurveda and Maharishi Ayurveda, this is second nature, but it's really outside the mainstream. However, this is a quote from a monograph a few years ago. It was a brilliant monograph by Leo Gallen called Gastrointestinal Dysregulation, Connections to Chronic Disease. So it's a brilliant work. Anyone interested in this subject, I would recommend this highly. It's put up by the Institute for Functional Medicine. You can just Google Functional Medicine, Institute for Functional Medicine, and it will come up. And he says in there, the idea that disruptions in gut function, means digestion, might be implicated in systemic disease is an ancient one. From an Ayurvedic text comes a definition of health as profound as any modern one. And then he goes on to quote this familiar quote that's been mentioned several times so far. I'll hazard the Sanskrit. Samadosha, samagnisha, samadhatu malakriya, prasanat indriya manaha, Vasta ibidiate. Thank you. I'll come to the rescue. Meaning, one whose doshas are balanced, whose digestive fire, Agni, is balanced, whose bodily tissues, dhatus, and elimination processes, malas, are functioning normally, and whose senses, mind, and self are filled with bliss. Such a one is called a healthy person. So note the position of digestion here. It's number 2 after balance of the doshas, the controlling principles. It's very prominent. So we know from modern medical science that the gastrointestinal tract has the largest surface area in the body which is interacting with the environment. It's over 200 times greater than the surface area of the skin. And the main function is to assimilate nutrients and expel waste. However, we now recognize that another very important function is that the GI tract is constantly sampling antigens from the environment and initiating and modifying immune responses. And it turns out that the preponderance of immune activity in the body is going on in the gastrointestinal tract. And it's intimately connected with the immune system in the bloodstream, the bone marrow, and all over the body. So that disruption of immune processes in the GI tract has profound effects on inflammatory and immune processes throughout the body. So this is one way to understand the ancient Ayurveda principle that digestion is the key to systemic wellness. And here's a little graphic that just gives the, Dr. Fagan talked about a central dogma of molecular biology. It's the central dogma of Ayurvedic internal medicine. We have an Agni, a digestive power, and Agni can be in 2 forms, or rather we could say 2 extremes, and there's a continuum, of course, between them. On the one hand, there's proper digestion, which results in good health, through the production of ojas, which is the finest, the most refined product of balanced digestion and assimilation. It's understood to be a very refined chemical, we could say, that supports all of immunity and longevity. And the other extreme is improper digestion, which leads to poor health because of the production of ama. Ama being like the evil twin of ojas. It's undigested food that becomes toxified. And this graphic just shows the 3 doshas as they function in digestion. We have Vata on the right, responsible for transport, communication in the body. So it's responsible for the secretion of the digestive juices and the smooth muscle contraction that causes the food to move through the tract, peristalsis. Pitta is the basis of all the biochemical activity, the acids and the enzymes that break down the food. And Kapha, the basis of the mucous lining of the GI tract. It provides a protectant and a coolant so that the tract itself is not burned up and destroyed by the process of combustion that's going on through digestion. And these 3 have to be balanced. Another important issue in Ayurvedic digestion, ama. Our Ayurvedic teachers, I don't know if our Vedic faculty would all agree with this, but we were taught that the preponderance of chronic diseases are rooted in digestion and ama. Is that safe to say? Sometimes we've heard as much as 80%. So ama is understood to be an endogenous toxin, or maybe a collection of toxins, that result from imbalanced or incomplete digestion. It's formed initially in the digestive tract and literally means uncooked food or partially cooked food, but in a later stage, ama disseminates to the bodily tissues, the dhatus. And then it's said to localize in specific areas, specific tissues, and together with aggravated doshas, disrupts tissue function, producing, for example, chronic inflammation, which can be the basis of chronic disease. So the result is dysfunction and chronic disease. Now, some correlations with modern digestive science. So in Ayurveda, Agni is divided into 13 subdivisions, and the main Agni is in the central area of the stomach and the small intestine called the Jatra Agni. So that's where the trouble starts. There's some imbalance there, then the food is not completely digested. It leads to incomplete digestion, what we would say in modern science, intermediate metabolites, such as partially digested protein molecules. And then at a more subtle level of metabolism, which we would call in Ayurveda the Dhatu and Bhuta Agni levels, the body reacts against these partially digested molecules or intermediate metabolites, identifies them as somehow foreign, and begins to attack them, and this results in what's called antigen-immune complexes, which trigger inflammation, inflammatory responses, first within the gut itself, and then later that gets absorbed, those complexes get absorbed and create inflammatory reactions all over the body. And here's a little graphic to show this. On the top half, you see intact food molecules floating in the lumen of the channel of the gastrointestinal tract, and they're getting properly digested. Agni is functioning well in that scenario, and the nice little fragments are getting absorbed through the villi into the small intestine, into the circulation, and no problem. That creates ultimately downstream, that's going to create ojas, health, and happiness. But below the line, you see what happens if digestion is imbalanced. So we have the intact food molecules, but now Agni not functioning properly, so the food not being thoroughly broken down. We have these partially digested molecules or intermediate metabolites. They are getting absorbed through the wall of the small intestine, and the reason that that can happen, you see at the lower left, it says increased intestinal permeability. This used to be called leaky gut syndrome. How many have heard of leaky gut syndrome? Almost everybody. And now the name for that is being changed to increased intestinal permeability, or IIP, because what happens is, over time, these big, chunky, intermediate metabolites create the inflammatory actions, and then the inner lining of the small intestine gets inflamed and loosens up. The tight junctions between the cells get loose, and so you see the lines spreading apart there, and that allows the large undigested food molecules to be absorbed more and more over time. It's like a vicious cycle, and ultimately they get into the bloodstream, the lymph circulation, bloodstream. They create these inflammatory immune responses, and that sets up systemic inflammatory reactions all over the body. So now we know, and this is reported in the modern medical literature, and I'd say every few months it goes by, another one of these studies comes out or papers comes out that's relating especially autoimmune diseases